really just to get engagement in terms of, just what are some of your challenges. So just show of hands, how many of you right now are people leaders? Okay. Okay. So that means you're doing performance reviews as well? Okay. Yes. Okay. So show of hands, how many leaders do we have? Everyone's hand should be raised because default, everyone is a leader by default, right? Okay. So for those of you who are people leaders or aspiring to be a people leader, even if you're managing projects and you may not have people directly reporting to you, I really am inquisitive in knowing, what are some of the greatest challenges you have in managing and leading people. And I ask that because empathy is a behavior that I am right now studying and how it shows up in at work, and really trying to understand that, because sometimes it's a faux pas where we were like, it's this is soft skills, it's too touchy, but this is a way for me to really get more engaged and understanding, because I am on a mission that all leaders need to have this skill set in order for us, especially to manage and lead the next generation of leaders, specifically Gen Z, with everything that's happening. How many of us have Gen Zers? All right. So then you know what I'm talking about. They want to talk all the time and ask opinions. All right. So let's get started. So today, what I'm going to talk about is what it means to lead with empathy, how to navigate the path forward. This session here is really to position you where you have more of an awareness of how empathy shows up at work, how it shows up in your life, and that what we're learning today are some skills that you can take with you and hopefully implement within your team, within your staff, even with people that you work with, people that you know, so that we can begin to foster and begin to cultivate empathy. I saw this quote that Obama did, and he said, it seems we got an empathy shortage, an empathy deficit. More serious than the federal budget deficit, we become so cynical that it almost seems naive to believe we can understand each other across the gulf of race or class or region or religion. And in my opinion, right now, especially what is just happening since the pandemic, empathy is on a shortage. We are, especially with social media, we're so quick to not be able to relate or see ourselves in anyone's shoes. And there is a shortage here. So when I saw this, I was like, this makes sense. In the midst of 2020, when everything was happening, I was actually promoted. And I was promoted to manage a program that was greater than $300 million. And when I came on board, I had a cost account manager who, that's their role is to manage the money. And he was like, Uche, we got so much to spend. Spend. Okay, so in the midst of spending, he came back a couple of days later and said, oh, my bad. We actually have two contracts, one LOE, which is dollars, and the other one is hours. And the one that was hours is what we were spending on. So we had a deficit of negative $2,000. So this is my first week on the job. And I shut down the program. I sent an email out and I said, stop charging. Now, if you've ever worked or if you've ever gotten this message, there is a hoopla going on to the point that it probably already went all the way up short of the CEO. Again, this is a $300+ million program. And in the midst of that, when I shut down the program, I didn't hesitate. I didn't even have an anxiety to do it, because that has happened before. But what I didn't think about were the people who were working on the program. I didn't think about the fact that their managers now have to find them work, because when you don't work, you don't get paid, right? So that never crossed my mind. And I say that because, when I went down, my manager, she pulled me in her office and she said, well, you sure made a name for yourself this week. And I was like, yeah. But it was the empathy that she had for me that really positioned me to begin to think about this more. She began to tell me, that even though this is your first time in this role, it's okay. It's okay to fail safely. I've been in your shoes. I understand why you did it. And then she began to give me recommendations on how I could have done it differently. And I was like, wow, what if someone had did that to me when I made a mess when I first started my career 5 years ago, or 10 years ago, heck, 15 years ago, right? It would have helped me be different in how I showed up in the workplace. It would have helped me be different in how I communicated with people when I got in leadership roles, because I was taught to leave your personal at the door, and that when you step in here, it's all about business. But the reality is that no matter where we work, we are a people company, and people matter. So that was when I started really paying attention and understanding, how does empathy show up at work? What does this look like? If she does this to me, how can I foster that and do that to other people who work for me? So that was my first learning lesson, is people over profits in that case. So when I say I shut the program down, I shut it down. To this day, they're like, that's the woman that shut down our program. And I laugh, I'm like, yeah, I know. But in the midst of that, there was a learning opportunity for me. So, disclaimer, incorporating empathy into leadership doesn't mean that you don't set high expectations or high standards and challenging the team, right? It just simply means that these actions should be carried out with an understanding on their impact on people, while making sure that they have their dignity and support are upheld for everyone involved. There's nothing worse than I have seen people leaders who leave people without their dignity because they made a mistake. And whether or not they know it or not, or whether or not if they care to know it or not, it hinders progress, because it is something that you just can't shake off, because you have to see that person every day. And that behavior, whether you know it or not, that person that it happened to, they'll probably do that to someone else. So that's stigma. So again, there's a way to keep people with their dignity intact while offering empathy and then setting house standards and holding them accountable. But again, this is something that must be practiced, right? Every day, in every way. So what is empathy as a leader? How does it show up? Empathy simply means it's the ability to understand and share the feelings of others, enabling you as a leader to connect with your team members on a deeper level. And, in the midst of the pandemic, one of the things that I was faced with all the time was not just the sickness, was people having family members that passed away. And in the midst of that, even though you have a schedule you have to adhere to, right? You still have to be able to show empathy. And then as a leader, it's challenging because no matter how much training you get, nothing prepared you for that. Nothing prepared you for being a coach, a counselor, a friend, a mom, a dad. Nothing prepared you for that. And I had to learn how to have empathy during the midst of that, while still being able to hold them to high standards. So as a leader, we had to begin to think differently than we thought before. We had to have backups to backups to backups, right? And then for people who didn't come back because they just decided, that was something else we had to deal with as well. I remember my friend of mine early in my career, she was leaving her company because the culture was just off-putting. And instead of her leader empathizing with her, even showing some type of compassion, they said, well, good luck. And that was it. And she was just like, well, I gave 5 years here, and that's all I get. And again, I don't think leaders understand that, people leave for a lot of reasons, but the majority of reasons they leave because of their manager or leader. So you just have to be aware of that. And the significance of having empathy, especially in a technology-driven environment, and I'll talk about what I do, but the environment I am is a technology-driven environment. We need to have collaboration. There's no way that we're going to be able to meet what our sponsors want, what they're looking for, being able to solve the nation's top priorities if we're not operating in a collaborative environment. Driving inclusion, listening to other people's voices, and being aware to know that we don't have enough people, we don't have the right people on this team to give the best product. So we have to be able to, as a leader, to say, I have to get diverse perspectives here because we are doing a disservice to our client because we're in a homogeneous environment. And that is one of the main reasons why we need to have empathy. It enhances adaptability. You're able to adapt more quickly because you're thinking more collaboratively, you're thinking more like a team, and then it improves morale and retention. There is something very powerful when you as a leader understand that the people on your team are having hardship, no matter what it is. And it's extremely important when you are in an environment with other leaders and when they are saying, hey, such and such is not doing their job, such and such is not doing their job. If you're not aware of what's happening with the people on your team, it's doing a disservice to them because it could create the illusion that they're slackers. And you need to be able to defend them in those environments. But if you're not engaged with them, then you will begin to agree with the people who have this illusion of them. So it improves morale and it improves retention because if people don't feel supported, they will leave, period. And with the way the world is going now, you can make money doing anything now. So, we want to make sure that we're keeping good and great people on the team so that we can, again, begin to be more innovative and creative. All right, so who am I? My name is 𝙩𝙬𝙙𝙖𝙮, as our amazing MC said earlier. I'm a leadership and professional development specialist. I'm a speaker, author, and STEM advocate. I am now an owner of my own STEM leadership development training company. And for the last 22 years, I've worked in aerospace and defense companies, working primarily in the defense sector with missile defense, satellites, love it. And I decided to retire at the age of 44, my claim to fame, so that I can have more time with my family and pursue what I've always wanted to pursue, which is entrepreneurship. So that's who I am in a nutshell. And I have been on a mission more now than ever to advocate for more women in STEM because we're leaving at a higher rate now than we were before. And really to incorporate empathy into leadership because we need to make sure that we remain competitive against our competitors and we are doing what we need to do to keep our nation safe. All right. So here are my intentions for today. My intention is to make sure that you think in a way that you've never thought before. So I am known as the push coach to other clients. So that means I push them and I'm going to probably push you as well. I'm probably going to say some stuff that is going against your norm. And that is okay, right? Because when we're doing something against our norm, we are hesitant. It's uncomfortable. We can't stand it. It doesn't make sense. But that's okay because that's why you're here today, is to be aware and to gain knowledge. All right, it's to inspire you to advocate for and practice empathy as a leader in your respective industry. And then when you leave this session, you'll have a more depth understanding of why empathy is not just a soft skill, but a critical leadership tool that can drive innovation, enhance team collaboration, and foster more inclusive, scientific, technology, engineering-driven community. Yes, yes? Okay, so a couple of years ago, I was interviewed on Come to America, which has over, I think they said 30 million views. And I was talking about why is empathy the current leadership currency. And, if you could scan this, you'll be able to get access to it. And what we're talking about in that interview is she's challenging the norms about, well, what if people don't want to, what if you have a leader who is everyone in here like in science? Any okay, engineers? Okay. Oh, science and engineering? Okay. Wait, what type of engineer are you?
Well, I do outreach for the College of Engineering.
Okay. Okay. And kind of. Oh, okay. Okay. Wait, mechanical?
So, project.
Okay. 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 And scientists then? Everyone else? Okay. All right. So then it all applies. But what she was asking was that when when leaders are taking this training and they're uncomfortable, well, what if they're uncomfortable, 𝙩𝙧𝙬𝙀? Well, what do you do? And my answer to her was very simple. As a leader, because when you know more, you're expected to do more. So you have two choices. You can embrace it and be uncomfortable and learn, or you can leave. The leaders who are most detrimental to organizations are the ones who are willing to adapt, because they impact other people who work there and they leave. And we don't want any of that. Yes, yes? Yes, yes. Okay. Okay. So what I'm going to talk about today is understanding empathy and leadership, strategies for cultivating empathy, and then path forward with empathic leadership. Are you in Texas?
I used to be Tyler.
I'm from Tyler.
Oh, yeah?
Yes.
Remember CPNI?
Huh?
How big your CPNI?
Yes. I was actually thought you was going to be, I'm sorry, this is just like weird. I thought you were actually going to say Houston, right?
No, I did spend time down in Woodlands, yeah.
Oh, smoke. Listen, I just drove from Maryland today. And to meet someone from Tyler, Texas, where we have 75,000 people, you don't understand. This is like, yes, thank you. Thank you. Okay, so this is what we're going to be talking about today. All right. So understanding empathy and leadership. Show of hands here. How many of you have done any exercises, or people that you lead, or people that you're, colleagues, and you're like, okay, I'm being empathetic here? Anybody? Yes. Okay, so how did you feel in that moment? Were you uncomfortable? No? Sometimes? What made it uncomfortable?
So I was challenged by somebody who was at an entry level, and I had more experience, and they were like trying to explain why they were right.
Cool. Okay. All right. Anyone else? Yes.
A little bit of guilt that I'm not going for some reason to show this manner, so I'm present to the best I can.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
Sometimes it can be challenging to maintain empathy over time. So yeah, a situation might arise, but you show empathy and feel it in the moment, but it doesn't go away for the other person. They might be dealing with it for 6 months, a year, whatever it is. Like the debt.
Yeah. Yes.
I think what you said at the beginning too is where you leave everything at the door and you just come your professional self, and then somebody might have things going on and it's like they're oversharing. It's like the boundaries a little bit and balancing that empathy with it's business time.
Yes. Yes.
So I work at a museum. I was one of the students actually work there as well. I worked with a lot of students. I feel like that was my job, was to sort of be empathetic to especially the early career folks, and try to help guide them and sort of set the boundaries, but also I think there's a lot of room in there.
That's the biggest thing. You said set the boundaries, because again, when in a way they're like, oh, right, they're paying attention to me and they're listening, and then okay, well, I think they're my friend now. So now I can go to them all the time. But it's setting boundaries, because you still have to get the work done. But with early career professionals, how often do you have to set the boundaries? Because I'm finding that it has to be a lot. It's repetitive all the time.
I think that was one of my major tasks. Yeah, was one of the major jobs, because this was often their first job, and where I work now, it's still, they're not students anymore, but they're early career. So I think that we're setting the tone for them.
Mm-hmm. So in marketing, so like in marketing, how many baby boomers? Okay, Gen X, millennials. Okay, so in marketing, they have something where it's called like the touch point system. It's a process until you buy something. So for baby boomers, they were saying, when they do marketing, it was like maybe 6 times for the same product, right? 4 different ways, newspaper, TV, huge billboard, or something else. Just 6 times, and then they're probably like, oh, that's cool, right? For Gen X, they were saying that it's about 9 times, maybe 10 times. For millennials, 24. So because of social media. So the fact that you're having to constantly do it, it makes sense that because it takes 24 times where they get touch points in order for them to even purchase something. So I can't even imagine in the work environment how often it has to be. So that's a lot of touch points. All right. So understanding empathy, how does it show up as a leader? Well, one thing is that you'll be able to perceive, understand, and share the feelings of team members. And I caveat by as I'm talking about this, let me be clear. It has to be in a safe environment, because I have seen leaders use it against their team members, and they'll use it as a performance issue. And you have to be very careful as well, right? So you don't want to be the leader when you're saying, hey, this is a safe environment. What's happening here? I need to understand, we're not gelling, we're not collaborating. What's the issue? And it's an opportunity for them to feel safe, transparent. But if you're going to use that against them for performance reviews, then it just messes up everything. So you have to be aware of that as a leader as well, is that this is not something to be writing down to use against them to rate them on performance. It's actually to be used to encourage innovation and increase performance. And it's like this, what we share here, this is it. Okay. All right. The second thing is you can actively step into the other person's shoes, which fosters a more depth connection. Empathy is, the reality is when you can relate to them because you've been through it. What you're talking about is compassion. Is being able to understand that they're going through challenges and that you're like, I get it. But empathy is, if you haven't been in that person's shoes, it's going to be hard. It's going to be challenging for you to really understand, right? Because my mom passed away. If someone else is like, well, I understand how you feel. My next question is, did your mom pass away? Well, no. Well, then you have no idea what I'm feeling. So that's just something to think about. There's a difference between empathy and compassion here. Also, too, is you value communication, team members' well-being, and you acknowledge their diverse perspectives. It can be overwhelming because I have been on teams where they're like, okay, so how's everyone's day today? Listen, we gotta get to work. This is not what we're doing here today, right? But, it's a time and place. We'll do that on Mondays only, and maybe for the first 10 minutes. But the rest of the time, we have to stick to the agenda. So setting boundaries is really important. And let me just say this. They may still come to your office and say, hey, I really like to ask how everyone's day is every time we meet, because it helps me out. And that's something that you're going to have to set like that, be able to cultivate and make sure you set those boundaries with them, and it won't end there because they might come back again. But you just have to make sure as the leader that you're setting boundaries effectively. Okay, so here's some strategies for cultivating empathy. One is to truly practice listening to what they're saying without immediately formulating a response. What I like to do is to say, so what I hear you saying is, because oftentimes we are quick to speak and slow to reflect. So we want to make sure we are understanding what they're saying and not just trying to hear ourselves talk. We want to make sure that we're showing vulnerability, which can encourage a culture of trust. When I was working for a company in 2016, I had went to this this leader, he was doing a talk, and he said something. I was like, I've never heard a leader say this. He was talking about his career path, and he was talking about how he was on a conference call, and they were asking people opinions. And he said he gave his opinion. And one of the leaders on the call said, shut up. We don't want to hear from you. Don't ever talk again. And I said, so when he was telling us this, I was like, oh, well, what did you do next? And he said that changed him. But the point of this story is it made me look at him differently, because I was like, wow, for him to be able to share that as a higher level leader shows that he understands it, and he was very vulnerable. And as a result of that, he actually got more people wanting to work for him, great people to work for him, because he was very vulnerable. So that's just something to think about and he took a risk, right? But the fact that he did that, it opened up other doors as well. And then the third thing is feedback and reflection. We need to be okay to solicit and provide constructive feedback. One of the best trainings I've ever done was emotional intelligence, and use it. The first thing I used was being self-aware. Because when you're in that moment, and when you are, I'm going to do it from 2 points. I'm going to do it from the point as someone who is a staff talking to a leader, is when I've had conversations with my leaders, and when they say something that just, I have to breathe. In that moment, while they're talking, I'm like, well, why are you feeling this way? What is happening right now? What is she doing that you are feeling upset, or you're having this feeling? So that's the self-awareness. And then the self-management part came in, was me learning how to respond effectively. Being in a position where I can respond in a way that I can get the answer that I need from her, right? Because at times when it's emotionally charged, we can't get the answers that we want. If a leader is saying, hey, you're not doing a great job, you come in late, I see you all the time on your phone, and already they are probably, like, why are you saying this to me? And it becomes an emotional conversation. But when you're really practicing emotional intelligence, you get yourself aware that, okay, I'm feeling something in this moment. I need to self-manage. And what do I need to say next? Because oftentimes you may need to coach up. In my industry, coaching up is a norm. My leaders that I had, this didn't exist. I mean, I had leaders that was putting their shoe on the table, saying, hey, y'all need to get this together, banging. It was ridiculous. But that's the environment that they grew up in. But that doesn't mean that's the environment I have to adapt to, right? You train people how you want them to treat you. So as a result of that, for me, emotional intelligence is something that I used all the time in the environment that I was in, because it was for the safety of my mental. If I didn't practice this and use this, I would be bat crazy. Okay, so that's something to be aware of. And then social awareness, and then relationship management. How many of you have taken emotional intelligence training? Okay, how many of you use it? Okay. You're about to raise your hand. Was anybody back there about to raise their hand? Okay, I thought someone had a question. All right. So when we talk about social awareness is really when your actions towards it's when your actions towards others influence your relationship management. So you just want to make sure that you're aware of how you manage the relationship with others from an emotional intelligence standpoint. I don't think you can have empathy without having emotional intelligence.
I just wanted to talk about the active listening piece. I've done a lot of this work with myself, and the one thing I discovered is that we have to teach people how to listen, because we're so busy and we're in such a fast pace
race, like you mentioned earlier, that we really don't listen. And so we think that we're hearing what they're saying and we're actually not. So an activity that I do with my staff, what I did with my staff to teach them how to listen it's basically called active listening. But I pair them up, and one is A and one is B. And A has 2 minutes to talk, and B cannot respond at all. And they're like, oh, that's no big deal. But when a person starts talking for 2 minutes and we're designed to just interject all the time, that's a long time. And it was troublesome for them. And I said, you cannot speak. What you have to do is you have to be actively engaged in the conversation. You can use your body language, but you cannot speak. And then they switched. And what came out of that is they realized that they're so used to interjecting when somebody's speaking that they're really not hearing what that person is saying. And it was a game changer for the staff.
That's good. In this organization did this study, and what they found out in terms of active listening for women is that when we are in an environment and we are the minority, we active listen. The recommendation was to speak out of turn. And the reason why, because if you did not, you would not get heard. And if you didn't get heard, people forget you're in the room. So that's a great one. But also in addition to that is making sure that you're not just sitting there being an active listener, but you are participating. You know, when they say, hey, I need a seat at the table. Someone said, no, 𝙩𝙬, you need to sit at the table and participate. And I was like, ding, that's exactly right. Okay, so when we talk about a path forward with empathic leadership, what does that look like? First thing is, can we embed that into the organization culture? My company, in a way, they had this as one of their core values. So you know how organizations have their core values, what they're going to do for the next 3 years. And, you know, because we see this all the time with DEI. We're going to do DEI. We're going to blah, 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 blah. Okay, so one of those things was really out of that was to have it as a core value. And there have been case studies, and I have one that I'm going to be showing up, where an empathy-driven culture has led to significant improvements in employee satisfaction and business outcome. But that makes sense, right? And also, too, is to make sure that you are doing continuous learning. You know, how many of you know how you have a book that's a great book? But in order to really understand the book, you got to carry the book like you might carry your Bible or something similar to, because you have to keep coming back and back and back to it. That's the same thing with any type of skill or behavior. You can't do it once. You can't even just do it a lot of times. You have to do it. It's like you're eating. Just like you need water and you need food to eat. Practicing these type of behaviors is the same type of philosophy. You have to do it continuously all the time in order for it to have impact. Because when you need it, the goal is you are doing it without knowing you're doing it. Because in those times that you need it, it's already showing up. Opportunities and integrating empathy into leadership development programs. All the leadership development programs I went to, they don't even talk about this. They don't talk about how to, you know, position yourself to be in a person's shoes or even just have compassion. That is null and void. What we do talk about are those hard skills. Soft skills is just something that we're just squeamish about, you know, and it shouldn't be that way. Because again, we are a people organization and people have feelings, people have behaviors. And the best way is we need to be able to tap into that to get the best person available for the role. And then self-reflection and feedback in growing one's impacted capabilities. So the best way is just to solicit feedback. This company I worked for, every year they sent out a survey to the people that worked for you. And you got to see the results. Oof. Let me tell you, that was one of the most stressful things ever. But it was great because I got to see real time what, not necessarily what I was doing wrong, but what their expectations were of me moving forward. And it was a game changer in how I managed and how I showed up. So don't be afraid of feedback. It's okay if it's not good. It's even better when it's great. Okay, the fourth thing is promoting open communications and vulnerability without being penalized. And I talked about that earlier, right? When you're encouraging transparent communication channels that allow for success, challenges, and failures, it is not for you to penalize anyone. If you're going to do it, just don't do it, period. If you know you're gonna use this from a performance perspective, I'd rather you not promote it, because you're gonna impact and hurt someone in a way that they can never come back from. And then leadership vulnerability is a tool for building trust and encouraging team members, which is what I talked about earlier. So the next thing is really recognizing and addressing burnout and mental health. When I had my first son in 2009, and I had no experience in having a child. Of course not, right? It's my first child. And I was away from home. So, and it was in Massachusetts. So if you've ever lived in Mass, it's like a lot with the weather. But I had my son in the fall and it went straight into the winter. And the reason I'm telling this story is that this was a time where you couldn't work from home, period. And I remember talking to my leader. I was like, listen, it'd be great if I can have a laptop, because my son got sick a lot and I had to often take him to the hospital or the urgent care. And she said, absolutely not. She said, I don't care how many kids you have. We don't do that here. We would never do that here. And don't even ask ever again. And I was like, what? And I left 5 months later. So it hurts when, as a leader, on how you communicate, even if you don't understand what they're saying, but there's a way to communicate that, even though that is the company roles. Now, again, this was 2009. Things have changed a lot since then. But that was my first time too. I was like, oh, I don't ever want to be this leader. I don't ever want to show compassion. That's the word I was using. Show compassion. I don't ever want to be the person that's not showing compassion to people that work for me, because I want them to always come in and be productive. When we impact a person's mental state, and when we impact really their determination, their positivity, any of that, it impacts how they show up and how they perform. Performance will go down. No matter what, it will go down. So we just need to be aware of that in how we're addressing it. And if someone is saying, I'm burnt out, it's okay. Someone I'm coaching right now, she has Gen Zers that work for her. And one of her Gen Zers applied for a job. And she got an email back and it said, hey, I want to talk to you about the role you applied for. And she said, the Gen Zer said, oh my gosh, I need a mental health day before I open the email. And she's like, well, why? And she's like, I just can't deal with this. But she walked her through it. She came into work. But my point is, I think this is where we're going. This is what the workforce is going to be about. And as leaders and as mature leaders in our field, professional with experience, we're going to have to be able to navigate that. Now, if she had said this probably maybe 15 years ago, she would have gotten, heck no, bring your butt into work. I don't care what's going on. But this leader, she understood the environment that is coming up right now in the workforce, and she is adapting to it. Does that make sense, everyone? Okay, so case study, Dan Price. You guys remember Dan Price? Dan Price was the CEO that came out in 2015 that said that he was going to set the $70,000 minimum wage for everyone that worked for his company. He is a credit card processing company. He was getting $1 million a year. So he was like, you know what? Take my salary and give everyone $70K. This was insane. It blew up. Like, people were like upset at him. It was crazy. And I was like, dang, I mean, just to give him $70K? Who gets upset about that? But what has happened since then is he had made a post. I follow him on LinkedIn, but he had made a post that said that in 70K. They did the minimum salary in 2015. He raised it to 80K in 2022. 10 times their employees now have children. 70% of them have now paid down their debt. Their 401k contribution has grown 155%, just because he made that one action. And I was reading, and he said the reason why he did that was his friend was complaining that she couldn't pay her bills, that she just wasn't making enough money. And he said he resonated with that. And then he said that, you know, in his environment at that time, he had people that were CEOs that were making millions of dollars, that had yachts, and he had friends that were struggling to make ends meet. So my assumption is that he was able to relate, and there was a conviction that went with him, and he made that change. The point is that he saw something, he had compassion, he had empathy, and he did something about it. This is, you know, since then, a couple of other people have done it, but there can be positive outcomes as a result of having it and putting this in your culture. And his value system is purpose and people over profits. And also in 2020, he was saying that they were losing 40% of their revenue per month. And as a result of that, because he had did that in 2015, other people, maybe 90%, maybe 95% of the people that worked at the company at that time in 2020 were willing to give up their salary so no one got laid off. That's a culture. So now when they hire other people, they're now creating a culture of purpose and people over profits. And that in itself is a great case study. So recap, we talked about understanding empathy and leadership, strategies for cultivating empathy, and the path forward with empathy leadership. So reflections here. The question I want to ask you is, how can I become a more empathic leader? What steps can you take to foster that type of culture within your team? Any ideas? Yes.
This is a very small step. A lot of people think some of these things, but the one thing that people can do in leadership roles is to give up communication in the first possessive singular. It's the words of I, my team, my school, my staff. It automatically puts the primary. If we start utilizing more collaborative terms, ours, we, then we're automatically on the same side. Even in communication, I know it's a term that's coaching, but when speaking with a group of people, those single doesn't work. I haven't said it yet. You can go an hour not doing it. Expunging that ownership mentality helps. It's a tiny step, right? But if you're all together, you're all on the same side, then that's just a little bit more fertile ground for empathy to flourish. Versus
Agree.
It's a me, you.
I agree with that. Yes.
I have to admit, I'm stuck. I'm stuck on the definition of empathy having to be that I have to have gone through that experience to be able to be empathetic to someone else's experience.
Mm-hmm.
Because the reality is, I can't go through the experience of being a Black woman or a Hispanic woman.
Mm-hmm.
And yet I still feel like I can be empathetic. So help me understand, I'm stuck there.
Yeah, so I don't think you can be empathetic. I think you can show compassion. Because there's some things, the reality is, there's some things that we just won't be able to walk in their shoes. I mean, that's
So
the
then
truth.
how do I as a leader become an empathetic leader and build an empathetic culture? If what I'm hearing you say is that I can't do those things, then that's saying I can't be an empathetic leader.
No, because I'm going to assume that you have a diverse team and everyone is not homogeneous, right? You just don't have a team of African American women. You just don't have a team of Hispanic women, correct?
Right.
So when you demonstrate that, they're going to learn from you. That's the goal. When we talk about building an empathetic culture, it's not just about my small team. It's about me teaching and them watching, and then they can take that to their teams when they become leaders and begin to grow it exponentially. So you won't know, here's an example. You won't know what it's ever like to be an African-American man walking down the street, getting pulled over by the cops. You will never be able to empathize with that. And that's okay. There's nothing wrong. That's okay. But you can show compassion for it. You can sit down and hear their story. And then the next question is, what can I do to help? Does that make sense?
Getting there.
Okay. So it's not always one for one, but the goal is to build it small and then grow and grow and grow. That's really what it is. Like I won't be able, but there are things you can relate with them with. You know, if birth of a child, right? If they tried to get a raise and they couldn't, they had a leader who was horrible, that talked to them crazy, right? Or if they had a teacher who, you know, they were like, I'm trying to understand how I can communicate with this teacher, and I've never done that before. If any one of us have had horrible teachers, we can talk about that. There are other ways where you can empathize with someone. It's not just about skin color or any of that stuff. We are more alike than we think. So there are other ways that you can empathize with other people.
Okay, thank you, that helps.
Okay,
Thank you
got
for
it.
that. Appreciate it.
Anyone else? Yes.
I just saw a TikTok yesterday,
Yeah.
actually, where a woman talked about how she had formerly worked at Lululemon, and before they had a meeting, they would say, I don't remember the exact word that they had, but it was something like, does anybody have like clearances, like things?
My daughter, her second job was at Lulu, and they do that.
Yes.
Okay, do what? Do what?
So they sit down and they go, before the meeting, does anybody have like, you know, whatever clearances that they want to share?
Mhm.
And so these are the things that are weighing in the back of your mind
Mhm.
that may keep you from being completely focused on, you know, so like, sorry, yeah, I just want to say, like, my kid is sick and I didn't get a lot of sleep last night, and so like that's what's going on.
Mhm.
And so they all talk about whether they want to share or not.
Yeah, yeah.
Like, this is what's going on in my life, so that people have that natural want to go to the positive and the helpful rather than the, well, she's not doing her job, like she's not focused.
That's good.
Well, you don't know what she's dealing with at home, so.
They're making everyone aware. That's good. Mhm.
I just think sometimes showing and extending an element of grace to people. I think leaders in general, people in general, want grace for themselves, but they forget to extend that same element of grace to their colleagues. It's just human nature that all of us will mess up at some time. It's just human nature. And when we do, instead of throwing that individual away or berating them and belittling them, give them an element of grace and give them the tools to become better. And I just love that phrase that you stated earlier, or I think it was you or someone else, but people over profit. You know,
Yeah.
I think that the most important, and I share this in our organization, that human capital is more important than anything else. And you know, when individuals come in and say, I've got to be out, my mom has cancer,
Yeah.
or my dad is down sick, or this and that, and I know we got such and such to do. I'm not going to start talking about what has to be done in all of this. The first order of business is to say, you take care of your family.
Mhm.
Because at the end of the day, when I mean the end of the day, I mean the end of life, this job is not going to be standing around the bedside.
Mhm.
I won't be there, and a lot of people won't be there. We may send a flower and say, sorry, or send a text. But the most important individuals will be those people that will be standing around your bedside, and those that will be there holding your hand and comforting you through this hardship. So I just think that sometimes extending that grace, and when we extend that grace to individuals, they extend it back. It goes back to what you said about the gentleman that offered the $70,000, and it was so easy for them to say, oh yeah, we'll take a 10% cut, because they saw that element of grace and what that person had done for them.
Mhm.
So I think just a human part of just being kind and being graceful and realizing that we all are in this together. And your point earlier is so powerful as you were mentioning the empathetic piece. I don't know what it is to be a black or brown male, but I know what it is to have a son who is and to be pulled by the cop just because you're driving on the road in a community they think you didn't belong. I know how that feels as a mother.
Mm-hmm.
I know how it feels as I know those things, and I think that bringing other people in and having them to be part of that talking circle, being part of that group where we can have that level of compassion, and we have everybody on that team, and we have to make the teams diverse so that you hear every perspective.
Right.
Because unless you've been in it, you don't understand what it is for people to look at you. I'm Native, so I grew up with people saying you are black or you are white, and I would say neither, and they would say, well, you're other.
Mm-hmm.
So I was other until I got up into college, when somebody really started putting down Native American.
Mm-hmm.
So I think those elements of grace and understanding the lived experiences of the people that you work with, and the only way you're going to understand those is by listening and having those conversations. I think sometimes we miss those lived experiences,
Mm-hmm.
and when we miss those, we are not able to empathize as we should.
And one thing too, as leaders, don't feel like you have to do this yourself, because that's one of the things, in my opinion, that has been forgotten, is that the expectations of what it means to be a leader has risen exponentially. And the reality is you can't do everything, but it falls on you. So don't feel like you have to do it alone. Get help. I'm hoping that everyone works with someone that they can trust. If you don't, get out. That's I am a firm believer. If you can't work for someone you don't trust, don't work for them. But make sure that you're not alone. That's the point. And that as a leader, when you're going through this, get help and guidance. The point of having, when you work for someone else, is being able to say, hey, this is what's going on. I need some help here. And both of you brainstorming on how you can make the team environment better. Does that make sense? Okay. Thank you for that. Okay, so here's some immediate steps forward. What's your name? Derek? Okay, so Derek talked about some things that they're already doing, which is removing the word my and I and really replacing it with ours. Quick note, when you're doing an interview though, it's okay to say, I did this, okay? Just quick note. In the interview, but however, in a culture and team environment, they're doing a couple of things that I love. One way is just to identify the area where you want to use the skills. It could be something very small, but the point is that you're making movement and progress. You can commit to having an open and honest dialogue with a team member or colleague to understand their perspective better. If you are having maybe certain challenges with people on your team or a colleague, this is a great opportunity to practice active listening but let's listen, not to respond, but listen to listen. Okay, because sometimes we sit there and listen and we're like, I don't even know what you say. You've been talking for 2 minutes. So we want to make sure we're paying attention. And then also just explore other resources and training to further develop your understanding and practicing of empathy. The long-term commitment is really, if you're working with, in your organizations with any DEI teams or anything that's trying to do something different, it's a great time to try to implement long-term solutions. And then above all, please set measurable goals, because that's how you can get funding to continue it, because leaders want to see what progress you've made so they can continue to fund you. That's the biggest thing. We want funding. Okay, so here's some resources. The Empathy book, I was reading that earlier. That's actually a really good book. It's very, what I like about it is very basic, and it just makes it really plain and vanilla. And then of course the Emotional Intelligence book as well. Okay, so in closing, when I talk about empathy, when I was working in 2015, 2016 at a new job, I had a team of people, which was, let me say this, it was a lot going on. And I think that maybe the first week, when I say a lot going on, meaning that they hadn't had a leader, people were leaving the team, people were in roles that they should not have been in. They didn't have a great name within the organization. So they brought me in to pretty much try to reduce all of that. Okay. And one thing I knew immediately was that I knew I needed a mentor. And I got a mentor. And let me say this, the first 30 seconds, when I say I threw up on him, it was just like, blah, 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 blah. And the first thing he said to me was, take a moment. He said, I'm going to be honest with you. Your first year, you're going to be storming all over the place. And he said, you're going to have to give yourself grace. And that's okay. He said, the next year, you're going to be forming it. That's when things are going to start making traction. You're going to start seeing the puzzles. They're going to start connecting. And he said, enjoy it. And then he said, the next year, things are going to start becoming normal. And he was absolutely right. So find your storming, forming, and norming. Don't be hard on yourself. Give yourself grace and continue to learn more and more. Okay. And if you want to learn how to connect with me, I am at 𝙤𝙬𝙢𝙪𝙢𝙀 on LinkedIn. Those are my other stuff, but I'm pretty much usually on LinkedIn. And if you want to email me, if you have any additional questions, or if you want to bring anything like this to your organization, let me know, and we can definitely have a conversation and talk. So, any questions? And performing. Well, we always performing. Yeah. I didn't know about performing. I haven't heard that one. They didn't tell us that one because they're just expecting us to perform the whole 3 years. Any questions?